First of all, thank you to all the candidates for showing up today. That's really important. I'm an anti-corruption campaigner, so I have a lot of interest in how political parties are funded. I've spoken with most of the parties represented here today, not all of you, and I know what's in your manifestos about political finance reform. I've noticed a pattern where politicians and political parties are more interested in reforms that would benefit their party and disadvantage their political opponents. My question is not what reforms would your party enact, but where are you willing to give ground?
All right, thank you very much. Not what reforms would you enact, but where would your party be willing to give grounds to be disadvantaged to try and get a more even playing field? I'm coming to the Liberal Democrats first.
So we obviously want proportional representation. You said don't list your policies, but we clearly do. We think it's wrong that first past the post prioritises the two major parties, means that in a lot of marginal seats you have to vote tactically, means that you can't really vote with your heart in some seats. So would we give ground on that? Well, we've kind of had to for years, but no, that's definitely something we would fight for, and we would prioritise over a lot of other policies in a new government. Things like, you talked about anti-corruption, things like giving up lobbying jobs, etc., they're in our manifesto. Would I give up on that? Well, not really. I think it's very important that our MPs are paid to be a member of Parliament rather than to take lobbying jobs or other jobs in the new Parliament. So not something I'd really compromise on either. Reform of the House of Lords, I mean, it's something that definitely needs doing. Would we compromise on where we get to with that? Yes, we would. I don't think I'm answering your question, but I don't know if I've understood enough of what exactly you want to have more of it. Can we get clarification?
Okay. Sorry, to be fair, your question was slightly in the negative, so is it okay if they list the things that they would do as anti-corruption measures, as well as ground where they would give? Sorry, just wait for the microphone, and then if you could clarify your question really succinctly for the dim of understanding, which is me in the middle. If I can understand it, then probably the candidates will be able to understand it. Thank you.
So I'll give an example. I've seen smaller political parties who are willing, who would put in their manifestos a commitment to tackle large individual donations, for example, which some parties more than others rely on. I'm interested in where parties are willing to come together for these reforms, not just back reforms that benefit them.
Right,
Does that make it clear?
It does, but I think the difficulty with the question is you're asking where people are willing to come together and no one person can answer that because you would have to agree to collaborate. So, so maybe they could talk about that and what reforms that they would put into place. I think that's a more even-handed question. All right. So you've got a little bit of time left with the clarification now, and then we'll move on.
Okay. So would we work with other parties for political reform? Yes, absolutely. Would we compromise on things that don't benefit us? Yes, absolutely. Do we think resolving corruption is important? Yes, absolutely. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. That's the end of your time. So.
Okay.
Thank you for your question. Absolutely, I'd be willing to work with other parties to make headway on anti-corruption measures. What I've found over the past 4 years is that the Yahoo image of Westminster that everyone sees on their television screen, particularly if they watch Prime Minister's Questions, which everyone says they don't like, but it's the thing that everyone asks me whether they can get a ticket to. So some things are slightly off between the two statements. But that Yahoo environment is not really what defines Parliament. There is a huge amount of cross-party working on single issues like air quality and the APPG air quality that I established, on a huge number of other issues. We simply need more MPs who are willing to push this in their parties and work cross-party. I think that's where it comes from. And that's where the character of your individual MP makes a huge difference, and signing them up pre-election to commitments in this area is important. I think another area we need to look at, I don't think MPs should have second jobs. I made that commitment when I started. I've never gone near a lobbying firm, a directorship. I haven't got shares in anything. I've never looked at a second job. This job occupies all my time. I don't know how other people find the time, if they're being a good local constituency MP and looking at legislation, to do that. We need more transparency, absolutely, around lobbying, and a far harder limit on the amount of time before you can come back into a lobbying job if you've exited government, particularly if you've been a minister. And I think, and I mentioned this in another Hustings, we do need, in terms of transparency and corruption, to overhaul our electoral system. And this is really important for a referendum, because the Electoral Commission as it stands is simply not in a fit state to oversee a referendum where digital ads are bombarding people with bespoke messages. We don't know what's going out to who. Thousands and thousands of messages from all the political parties have been sent in this election. And where there's disinformation and other things being pushed. We need an electoral system fit for the 21st century, for that digital age.
That electoral system should be proportional representation, Matthew, which you don't support. I mean, if we had proportional representation, we would be working in coalition. And then we would have every voice represented, working together, discussing things. We wouldn't have had Brexit because we would have had a system where people's voices are represented. We wouldn't have had this sense of an outclass, people whose voice are not heard. I think we need to work towards a system more like the Scandinavian system again, where you work in coalition. And even if you hate each other's policies, you still have to sit around together and listen to each other and compromise, yes. I love Morgan, I don't know if anyone's seen that, and that's how that system works. It's about politics in Scandinavia. So I've worked in a coalition with the Silvertown Tunnel campaign, and we've had people who've said things that I didn't personally agree with, but I've worked with every party except the Conservatives who didn't want to join us. But every other party did, and we have had some very useful discussions, and we have made compromises. For example, smart road user charging or tolling is something that the Momentum group didn't agree with, but I felt very personally strongly about. So we've had to make compromises, and I think that's how things should be. That's how we work within our families, in our communities, and that's how government should be. So I'm very, very strongly in favour of coalition, and we need proportional representation to get there. As far as giving ground and benefits for our party is not working for the benefit of our party, it's working for the benefit of the planet and our future. So everything that we believe in, I think, is for the benefit of everybody. And so that's, I'd still work for those in coalition, I'd make compromises where necessary, but I still think that our party exists, is not a selfish, tribal group. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think transparency is always the answer to this. If we're going to have individuals donating to political parties, then it should be transparent. You should know who's donating to political parties.
Would you support the publication?
Sorry, can we let the candidates answer the question they've been asked? It's a difficult enough question as it is. Tom, just carry on with this.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, just quickly on the Russian point, is you can go on the Electoral Commission, you can see anyone who's giving a large donation, including Russians. So we do have a transparent system. I do think that being a Member of Parliament is a full-time job. So if I'm elected, I would agree with Matthew, I wouldn't take a second job on. And I don't... Alright, if I can finish the point, because I didn't remember any of my colleagues up here being interrupted.
If we can not shout over the candidates, that would be helpful, please. I know it's strong feelings. Thank you.
I don't actually believe that proportional representation will make politics better or more transparent, because I think what you'll do is, because first past the post in most elections will deliver a decisive result where you get a party of government, I believe that it means there's less backroom deals that go on. I think proportional representation will lead to more hung parliaments, more backroom deals, and I don't believe you actually need proportional representation in order to make parties work together. I think there's plenty of examples of the parties coming together, working together. As I started my opening statement with, I do think politics has got more bitter and divisive, and I think actually we all need to make an effort to take that bitterness and that dividing out of politics so that parties can get back to working together.
Well, this is a big question for me, as I haven't been in politics for too long. But in a nutshell, being together as a party or political parties, it's the best thing that could happen to any nation. If all parties will work together in coalition, which I support and we support, because we've all got beautiful and wonderful plans in our manifestos that will affect and impact on this great nation to make it work brilliantly, even outside EU or within EU. Transparency is the most important thing there for any big donations and supporters of political parties or individuals. And CPA believes that we can compromise on some policies that we have, in as much as we are on the same page and we have we're taking from each other's we're taking a leaf from each other's book. Like a Green Party, we support their policies of making a green economy. We support building more houses for homelessness and tackling the poverty that is in our society, and looking after families and supporting marriage and fighting crime. Because
15 seconds.
yeah, so I believe that there could be compromise and we could all work together as a party. If anybody comes together into the House of Parliament, we can always contribute to each other's quota. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know, Neil, is there anything we can do about the slight feedback? I think as well, guys, if you just hold the microphone a little bit further from your mouth, that will probably work. Okay, it wasn't early, but I'll leave that to Neil, the sound is Neil there. Yeah, right, so sorry, we're going to move on to our next question, please. And let's go to the lady on the end of the row with glasses there, just behind Colin. That doesn't help you identify the lady if you don't know Colin.
Thank you all for being here. My question is about housing. I've worked as a teacher here for about a decade, and when I go into Woolwich and I see all those new flats going up so very fast, and then I look at the prices and I think of my students who are working really hard in a very difficult time in their horrible new GCSEs and BTECs, and I just think, what's there for them? And I'm interested to know what your specific policies are about housing, particularly for young people who are starting out on not huge wages that seem to me haven't gone up that much in the last 25, 30 years. And again, I think of my students from a secondary school who worked so hard to get their qualifications, and even if 3 or 4 banded together, they couldn't afford one of those flats. How are they supposed to have hope and contribute and continue unless they have hope of a home?
All right, thank you very much. We'll get the candidates up. If anybody's just coming in at the back, there's lots of seats down the front here. You're welcome to come down and sit. We're starting with Matthew.
Sorry, I didn't catch your name. Alison, it's a really good question. I think of all the local issues, in terms of what affects most people, housing is it. We've got a housing crisis across the country. In London, it's one of affordability. And I have people in my surgeries week after week in tears, in absolute desperation, because they're either in a home they can't afford, they're in poor quality private rented housing, absolutely some of the stories I could tell you about rats running over children's beds, a mile or 2 from where we sit. Or they can't afford their service charges, or they're renting a so-called affordable shared ownership property or a leasehold property. So we've got to tackle the affordability crisis. And that means good development locally, fighting for good development. I've spoken at 2 public hearings during this campaign, the Rockwell development in Charlton and Maya Homes' 27-storey tower in Woolwich with 0 affordable housing. So we need to fight back. But that's the current system we've got. And that is a broken system, where you are haggling with developers over the crumbs from the table. And it's partly because of legislation passed under the Coalition. In 2012, the Coalition introduced reforms to the National Planning Policy Framework, which guarantee developers a 20% profit margin, and if they can prove that they're not going to make their 20%, they can drive down the amount of affordable housing and other public amenity and public gain. So the market cannot solve the housing crisis locally. We need a big investment in genuinely affordable homes so that local residents can stay in their jobs, can work locally. It's having an economic cost locally. Teachers are a good example. Teacher retention and recruitment locally getting harder and harder as people have to drive in, Green New Deal again, from miles out in Kent because they can't afford to live locally, and it's having a real human cost. I have lost count of the number of cases where I'm dealing with families who are now in temporary accommodation in Dartford or further, still going to local schools and travelling all that distance. So it's affecting our kids, it's affecting the social fabric of our communities, it's not working. As I said, the market won't work. We need big public investment. Look at the plans in the Labour manifesto, please, for how we get more of those social homes.
Yeah, good question. My daughter recently got married. She's a teacher, her husband is a journalist, and they can't afford to buy anything. They can't even, we're hoping that they'll be able to live near us, because when they have children, I really want to be a grandmother to look after them easily. But what's going to happen if they have to move out far away? It's sad, it's very, very sad. We want people to stay here, but there's so much housing going up. Look at the peninsula. There are thousands and thousands and thousands. There's a new city being built down there. How much of it is affordable? Hardly anything. And when I was leafleting, I was being told, oh, those flats there, they're social housing flats, but they're being rented out by Airbnb. How is that happening? There's not enough control of things like that. The Green Party would invest build 100,000 new flats for social housing only per year for 10 years. So that's 1 million new social housing flats. We'd also refurbish property that exists already. We try and end people sitting in, like the Airbnb, sitting on homes, because land value tax so it'll cost people money to just own property, so they're not sitting on property for investment. We'd also bring in rent control, and Sian Berry, the Green Party Assembly member, has done an awful lot on renters' rights and trying to help with bringing rent control. So it's an absolutely vital issue, and it is, like you said, it affects our social fabric. So we need to deal with it, and we need to stop housing being for profit. Houses are for families to live in, homes to live in.
I'm just try swapping microphones, because this one hasn't been having any feedback, so just try using this one.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. As I said in my opening statement, I've been a London renter for 10 years now, so I really know what it's like to see your pay packet every month really eating into by the amount of rent you have to pay. And building more homes is obviously part of how you tackle the housing crisis in this country, but it's also about the type of homes you build. So, for example, we're going to put $2 billion more into the Affordable Homes Programme, and we're also going to look at $2 billion more. We're going to put $2 billion more into the Affordable Homes Programme, and we're also going to look at how we can look at the shared ownership programme and how we can make that easier to get into, how we can make it easier for to look at it as to how we can improve it for people in that programme.
Thank you. CPA would reform the Section 106 procedure to ensure that all new private housing schemes, where required, will have an element of payment towards new, affordable and socially rented housing provision. Unused development areas will be identified and significant new sites will be made available for housing. In an area where there are significant number of empty houses, if this cannot be brought back into use, we will look at redevelopment to improve and invigorate an area. This will sometimes be painful in the short term, but we always have a long-term benefit. We will ensure that 90% of housing is is carbon dioxide neutral by 2050 through housing developments that are carbon neutral and by taking further measures to encourage installation of existing houses. We will do our level best to avoid turning green sites into housing estates. This should only happen as an exception. Second homes to be a different use class in planning to main residents to protect rural communities with automatic planning permission for reversion from second home status to main resident status, but not the other way around. This will lead to an increase in current second home values rising faster. There's also, we're going to remove the concept of marriage value from all lease extensions and freehold purchases in relatively simple cases of leases of less than 50 years outside prime central London. This will reduce the cost of leaseholders by
Thank you, just. So I'll pass this on, see if you can make this one work. I think it's working all right.
Hopefully it'll work. Yeah, like Matthew, I've talked to constituents who have black mould up their walls, who have cracks through their ceilings, who have windows and doors that are broken in and haven't been fixed. There's a lot needs doing about this. As Victoria said, we need more social housing. So we, like the Green Party, will commit to building 100,000 social houses every year to to fix the stock that has been so badly depleted. We would have a total of 300,000 new homes built every year as well. We do need the development money that's coming from the developers spent more wisely. We've talked about GP surgeries on the peninsula that have not been built when they were planned. We've talked about more investment in transport needed to take all these new people into London as well. So we need services and housing going hand in hand. But it's also, as Matthew said, about investing in the housing we have, which is in such bad quality at the moment. And we would spend from our 130 billion infrastructure fund to upgrade the housing stock that is in council hands at the moment. It's also about housing that lies empty right now. There are a lot of unused properties across Greenwich, and we would increase council tax 500% on second homes and empty properties that have been bought for investment and don't have people in them. As part of that as well, we would increase the stamp duty for people buying from overseas. It is an outrage that some of those big projects on the peninsula have been marketed first to Chinese buyers rather than to local buyers. And we need to stop that, make them affordable, and make them targeted at our young people that so desperately need flats. As well as that, we have a lot in there for renters. There are big problems in London and about as well with the rental sector. We would try and force people to offer a long-term 3-year lease rather than the current insecurity around rental homes.
Let's go to the back. The lady on the end with glasses with her hand really high in the air, who's smiling at me now and waving frantically in a very nice way.
So there's 46% of homes in this constituency that are actually EPC level D and below. And so my question is about... Can I just ask you to clarify what that means for me and the rest of the audience that may not be overly familiar with that? So basically, when you have a home that isn't very good at keeping heat in, like your fridge, it's either A rated, B, C, D, E, F or G. But in our area, 46% of homes are not very good at keeping heat in. And these lead to problems like fuel poverty, and these can be remedied through energy efficiency measures. And there's been a massive hole in policy and funding and incentives and legislation to actually address this. A really good way of addressing this, I am biased, from Celsea, which is a community energy group, active locally, is actually to engage with people people and get their homes retrofitted. And
I'm gonna press you for your actual question, madam.
the question is, what will the candidates' parties do to increase in those improvements to get homes to go from below D and to actually get them up the pecking order?
All right, thank you. So the question is, what will your parties do to increase efficiency in homes and the standard of homes? And it's our Green candidate answering first.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I do know what EPC is. So,
I wasn't suggesting
lucky I do. Anyway, so we would say that we would improve 1 million homes to EPC A rating by retrofitting, and 10 million in the first year, 10 million homes by 2030 as part of our Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal, the idea of it is creating jobs that help with things like reducing carbon, renewable energy, and keeping carbon down by overheating homes, for example, or losing heat through bad insulation. And so it's a very important thing. And also, of course, we would encourage small community energy groups like Chelsea to be part of our community. That's part of our Green New Deal as well, so that we would encourage people to start to be aware of their energy use, that they start to think about retrofitting their homes themselves, and also create a whole new workforce that will come and retrofit homes and bring EPC ratings much, much better. So also solar panels, renewable energy, and helping homes make money from the energy they use as well, which is something that has been cut by the Conservative government. Over to you.
Well, under this government, we've seen the rollout of things like smart meters for both your energy use and to make sure that people are using energy more efficiently to cut their energy use if they don't need to. So I think that's one of the ways that I want to help. But I mean, in terms of the more technical question, if elected, I'd be more than happy to sit down with any group to listen about concerns they had and anywhere that I could represent those and get them any kind of legislative help they needed in making energy more efficient.
Well, I earlier addressed it when I was talking about housing, that CPA will ensure that 90% of housing is carbon neutral by 2050 through housing developments that are carbon neutral and taking further measures to encourage the insulation of existing houses. There will be insulation. There's some people that, even in this borough, there was a scheme of insulation of homes at the point that old houses will have insulation by the ceiling and probably on the walls, and that will help them to retain more heat instead of continuous heating of the house and exhausting the gas level or use of too much energy. So CPA will bring more of funding. We'll look for how to fund more installations of homes so that we use less energy. Then, as being said earlier, smart meters will be introduced where you can easily regulate the time when you want your heating to come up and when you want it to shut down. When you are all out of the house to work, your heating will stop. And when you're coming back, you would have set it to a certain time when you will be indoor. And insulation is the most paramount thing here for older houses. But in as much as we're building many more homes, we're going to respect our green spaces. We're not going to take all the green spaces that is meant for health to build thousands and millions of homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Obviously, insulation feeds into so many different aspects of our society, from the green side to the poverty side as well, so I'm going to talk through some of those. We would commit to spending £6 billion a year insulating, retrofitting home insulation. And we would also push for zero carbon heating as part of that as well, so that would be all a package together. You talked about community projects. We think they're vital, so we would empower councils to develop new community energy saving projects, including delivering housing energy efficiency improvements street by street, which cuts down on the costs of doing this as well. One of the biggest problems with insulation and poor housing generally is it's the poorest off that get hit by it. And when I work in the food bank, I often hear stories of people who've had to choose between feeding their children and turning their heating on that week. So we think the ones that need to be insulated first are the poorest households. So we would cut energy bills and end fuel poverty by 2025 by providing free retrofits for low-income houses. Those are the houses, most people who can afford it have already put insulation in their lofts. We think it's the people that can't afford it that need it most. Obviously, new housing needs to be built to a good standard as well, so we would build all new houses to a zero carbon standard by 2021, rising to a more ambitious passive house standard by 2025. But it's the retrofitting of low-income houses that I think I'm most proud of in this package of insulation in particular.
Alex, thank you for your question, and I commend Celsi. You know, I've worked very closely with you and in support of that work and getting awareness out to the local community. It's that really small scale stuff that can make a difference for people who don't know where they can save on their energy bills and who are simply being told by the government smart meter switch and the rest of it. The smart meter programme is pretty much a disaster. I know from my time on the Energy and Climate Change Select Committee the amount of problems. That is not the silver bullet that most people say it is. Energy use in buildings accounts for 56% of UK emissions. It's the most polluting sector. And we need to mobilise fully to address that. Up EPC ratings, build zero carbon homes. Rhiannon mentioned passive house. Absolutely, they are miles ahead of us on the continent in terms of building sustainable housing. But for me, this is just one part and parcel, of the package of measures we need to meet the climate and environment emergency. And that is the irony, and I'm just going to segue into a wider point, which is that nearly all of the policies that we require to get us back on track, because Tom said we've done very good emissions reduction over recent years. There are things to be proud of with the UK's record. We've halved emissions since 1990 levels, largely by offshoring production, and in terms of the amount of carbon we consume from overseas production, that needs to be addressed. So there's a role for the UK, but let's not get too proud of the UK record. We are off track on our current emissions targets. This government will not meet its fourth and fifth carbon budgets as things stand. Its net zero pledge has nothing behind it in terms of real action. We need a new home energy efficiency programme as part of one of those measures. We need to mobilise the country to do this because it is a climate and environment emergency. And the policies, as I said, they exist, they're out there, they're ready. Nothing new needs to be invented. And we've got to start taking that action now. The Chancellor invested just £30 million in the spending review on climate. We need 1 to 2% of GDP, says the Committee on Climate Change, to start to get to where we need to be.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question and then we'll have our closing statement. So if please keep your hands in the air if you've got a question about the subject that we haven't touched upon yet. Do you want to go down the back and find somebody? I have a choice of someone down there. If we could have a concise question, madam.
Thank you very much, and I noticed that all of you have spoken about peace. And I wanted to make the point that there's something...
No, if we could have a concise question, madam. The actually just a question.
The extradition charges faced by Julian Assange, the editor of WikiLeaks, relate to the publication of documents, solely to the publication of documents in August 2010 relating to war crimes, exposing the war crimes of the United States in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo. He's been awarded the Nobel Prize. Is this a question? Nominated for the Nobel Prize.
I'm not sure this is madly relevant to Woolwich and Greenwich.
Will the candidates congratulate WikiLeaks for their work for peace, which they profess to support?
I'm sure the candidates will. Maybe we combine it with another question. of a more local basis as well. So we will answer that. And is there another question more related to Greenwich and Woolwich? Yeah, lady at the back in glasses there, Helen, maybe. Is she another? Unless your subject's going to be on the same issue.
My question is on the duty of care by Greenwich Borough for prisoners in Belmarsh Prison. One in particular, Julian Assange.
We have a question about the NHS.
Does anybody have a local question not about Julian Assange? I know he's obviously a very popular gentleman. Right, sir in the glasses there, is your question about Julian Assange? You're absolutely certain. I'm really looking for it now. I'll ask them to answer. I will ask them to answer your questions while they do this as well.
Okay, so the candidates have touched on this very briefly, but it's about the NHS. It's a really important subject, so I'd like a full question on it. We've got our local hospital QEH had a black alert for the longest period. It's on its knees. I have a family member who's been unable to get mental health provision within the constituency. And I would just like to know what the candidates' promises are about that. I know that Tom's up first, so we've been told that we've got 50,000 new nurses, but how many of them are actually new? 14 new hospitals, how many of them are actually new? Our own urgent care department in the QEH is now run by a private company, and it's absolutely horrific.
Alright, so I'm going to take your question about the NHS everyone, because we need to move on. So, candidates, the two questions are, please state your policies, attitudes to the NHS and what you will do to secure the funding of it in the future, and also about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. You may attribute whatever time to each of those issues as you like in your final answer, which I will give you all 2.5 minutes on so that nothing is squeezed. Tom, you're up first.
Thank you very much for all those questions. On Julian Assange, first of all, no, I won't congratulate him. That is the bluntness of it. He picks and chooses which politicians he holds to account. You don't see him leaking information about Russia, because I think you know why. What would happen if he leaked information about Russia? Because we're fortunate enough to live in a democracy where we can criticise our government.
You can disagree with the speakers, but please don't shout hold
So, but Julian Assange talks about accountability, but he hid in the Ecuador embassy and wouldn't go to Sweden to be accountable for the things that he's accused of there. So no, I won't congratulate him. He also, he put the lives of, he leaked the names and locations of intelligence officers who do so much to keep us safe, and he put their lives in danger. So no, I won't congratulate him, and I make no apology for it. In terms of the more important issue, the NHS.
Right, please would you sit, sorry.
Hold on, I'm trying
to... Would you sit down and stop ranting, please? Would you sit down and stop ranting, please?
I'm answering a question on an important issue now.
Tom, just a moment, let me deal with that. Right, would you please sit down and stop shouting? If the candidates are speaking, then I would like to hear them speak. If you want to shout, go outside and shout. This isn't the place to do that. Let the candidates answer the questions that you've asked, or leave. Is that fair? If you shout over any of the other candidates, I'm going to ask you to leave. Okay? Tom, back to you, please. I'm sorry. And I would suggest you deal with the NHS now.
If you deal with the NHS now. So as you said, it's in our manifesto that we want to build 14 new hospitals. We want to put in the biggest cash boost in the NHS's history, with £33.9 billion more going in. And we're going to give 1 million NHS workers a 6.5% pay increase to help improve retention rates. Because as we spoke about at previous Hustings, the issue has mainly been, as you said, getting more nurses in, getting more doctors, making it easier for people to go see their GP so they don't feel the need to go to accident and emergency. Because I think part of the problem has been too many people feeling like the quickest way to get an appointment is to go to A&E and adding pressure on that. So that's why we're going to make it easier for people to get a GP appointment, as well as the cash boost that, as I said, I've already outlined.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. CPA is committed to a publicly funded, effective, and value-for-money national health service one that promotes health and well-being and provides the best possible outcomes, one that is free at the point of delivery for all UK citizens, one that is patient-focused and with integrated healthcare on a geographical basis. Finally, one that has adequate additional funding for improvements to health and social care. CPA has got policies for holistic care for patients, a more effective dovetailing of urgent and emergency care from NHS 111 and GP out-of-hours service through the 999 and ambulance service, urgent care centers to full A&E and major trauma centers, such that the patient gets the most appropriate treatment at the appropriate level quickest, encouraging and facilitating out-of-hospital services, including GPs and community services, to find appropriate ways within their communities of working at scale while still maintaining the personal link with my GP, quotes. Running further pilot schemes with locally integrated health and social care funding and clinical support so that care homes and intermediate care homes can provide more appropriate beds at a lower cost while still having the support there if required, while freeing up several thousand beds for actual acute use. Integration of physical and mental health aspects of care with parity of esteem and 24 hours mental health teams in all A&E departments by 2020. Enable additional work to take place between the NHS and the voluntary sector to increase the provision of good quality terminal and palliative and respect care for infants, children and adults, whether in their own homes or in hospices.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief on WikiLeaks. I welcome transparency, but I will leave the details of Julian Assange's legal case to the courts. I don't think it's my place to comment on those. With regards to the questions on the NHS, we've spoken a lot about what we can do to fix the NHS already, but I'll go through what I think are the most important things. So we would have a dedicated tax spent for the NHS of 1%, mostly targeted towards social care, towards fixing the immediate problem of staffing and paying for the NHS, but also towards mental health and social care. We want to make mental health waiting times equal with those for physical health. Mental health has been for too long abandoned in our society and leads to so many problems in other parts of policy as well, whether it be homelessness, alcohol addiction, gambling, or prisons too. All of these can be fixed with early intervention in mental health, particularly for children. We would spend £10 billion in investing in equipment such as fixing hospitals and mental health facilities. And we would reform the Health and Social Care Act, and particularly slow or end the creeping privatisation and end automatic tendering of contracts to the private sector as well. So, we do need it as well to staff it better, and we would end the GP shortage by 2025 by investing in more GPs and investing as well to bring back the nurses' bursary, particularly for nursing areas where they are most short, such as mental health and social care.
I'll deal with WikiLeaks quickly as well. I said this at the last Hustings, and you would have heard it, that there's a full hearing, as you know, for Mr. Assange on the extradition to the US set for the 25th of February. His legal team are going to contest that. There are plenty of grounds on which they can seek to resist the extradition. It is entirely a matter for the courts, and members of Parliament can't interfere in that ongoing legal process. So I'll leave it there. When it comes to our NHS is on its knees. It needs investment, absolutely. And I know this, my daughter was born just over 4 weeks ago at the Queen Elizabeth. The staff there are phenomenal. But they should not be working in the conditions and under the strain they've been placed under. And that is partly because of cuts over the last 9 years. and we need to restore some of the funding. It's been too little too late. Labour would pledge £26 billion in real terms funding, boost at the one-off, that includes £1.6 billion on mental health. But it's not just about investment, it is about reforming that Health and Social Care Act. And this is where I don't blame Rhiannon, she didn't vote for it obviously, but it's slightly glib to say let's just look at the Health and Social Care Reform Act, when it was the Liberal Democrats in coalition with the Conservatives that waved through the Health and Social Care Reform Act, that has fragmented our NHS, and that is as much a part of the problem as to why our A&E is overstretched as raw funding cuts, because the system is not integrated, it's not based on collaboration and cooperation. Different bits of the system fight each other. And we've seen wholesale privatisation. The previous two hustings I've taken part in different general elections, the Conservative candidates accused me of scaremongering. I'll read you the figures on privatisation. A record 9.2 billion of the NHS budget handed to private providers last year. That's up from 8.1 billion the year before. This is the logic of the reform, the Lansley Act, that was waved through under the coalition. More and more of our NHS is steadily being privatised. It's like a lobster being boiled in a pot. Every new contract has to have a private company automatically being able to tender for it. So the system, as well as the funding, needs to be addressed. We need to do that for our local hospital. It needs capital investment on the site. The site is one of the major reasons that care is problematic in A&E. But, let's look at what the root cause of this is, and where it goes back to. We don't need to overhaul that act and overturn it. That's not what the professionals want, but we need to roll back on the very punitive aspects of it that have caused us so much problem locally and elsewhere across the country.
Thank you, and congratulations on the birth of your daughter. My last child was born there as well. So we also hugely value the NHS, and I think everybody in this room, I'm sure, values it and wants the NHS to know, and the people who work there to know how much we respect them, and the people who've managed to stick in there, the nurses who've managed to stay. Huge respect to them, and the doctors too, because it's a massively overstretched provision at the moment. The Green Party would invest £6 billion per year in the NHS until 2030. That's a 4.5% increase on the 2018-2019 budget. We'd also put restore nurses bursaries with £100 billion a year, and I put here restore morale, respect for the NHS, because that is so important. People will work and will stay if they feel they're valued, and if the government values the NHS, it helps. But why have fights with junior doctors or GPs? It's crazy. These are so important. These people, they work in our society not just for money, but they must be valued. We'd reverse privatisation, scrap the Health and Social Care Act 2012, reinstate the Health Secretary's duty to provide services in the UK, abolish the internal market, and you mentioned mental health. We'd also put mental health care on equal footing with physical care and ensure that mental health therapies are available within 28 days, because when people need them, they need them desperately. And then we'd also include £4.5 billion on social care, so we have a more holistic approach to the NHS, so people can be cared for at home. So well done everybody who works in the NHS here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's everybody answered to the last question, so we're now going to have our closing statements, and I've asked the candidates to keep these to 90 seconds, partly because they've answered lots of questions already, and the pub's open, so there you go. What other issues? Yes, so if you could take it to about 90 seconds, that would be lovely. Your closing statement, Eunice, and then that's it. All right, thank you. Have you timed it that exactly? All right, sorry, everybody's timed their closing statements. That's exactly, so I'm going to hold it to that. Everybody will do 2 minutes, all right? But as I say, the pub's open.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone that has taken time out to come here today. The Christian People's Alliance is standing for policies no other party offers, starting with unity across the nation. We are standing for moral values throughout society, starting with marriage and the family, which is the most basic building block. We are standing for fair taxation, getting money from mega rich companies and that send their profits abroad and using it to help both the poorest in the society and hard-pressed city centers. We are standing for supporting prisoners as they leave jail to help them properly reintegrate into society. We are standing for moral education in our schools and open debate in society. We understand the needs of business, but we also understand the needs of the poor and will care for them, especially the homeless. We stand by the people that are struggling to get a place where they can lay their heads at night. So we're preparing to fund share shelters for homeless people and to have hot meals every day before they go to bed, and in the morning wake up to another day of struggle. But in all this that we're here for today, I'm here to present to you CPA as a party that supports marriage and family that makes a great nation. When the family is stable, the society will be stable and happy, then there will be a steady and a strong nation. Thank you.
Thank you once again for everybody that's come here tonight, this morning, to ask a question and to and take part in this democratic process. Thank you very much again to the Charlton Society for organising, and to my colleagues up here on the stage also coming through the process for keeping this campaign so positive, engaging in such a positive way, and all, as I say in one of our answers, actually all playing our role in taking some of the venom out of our politics and starting to heal some of the divides in the country. So I'm pleased that this has been a positive campaign so far. We've still got a couple of more days to go, so let's hope none of us trip up. And therefore, so in this election, in my election materials, I've put out some of the, as a campaigner for 10 years in this area, I've gone out and I've mentioned some of the campaigns I've run and been involved in. And it's on the basis of my track record that I'm putting forward my plan for our area. My plan for our area being to get Crossrail done, to get a fairer deal for renters, to support our local shops, to support the NHS, and to make our streets safer. Tonight, again this morning, I'm the only candidate representing the only party that wants to get Brexit done. We all spoke about our plans for the area, for the NHS, but the fact remains that only by getting Brexit done can we focus on these really important issues, such as tackling climate change. And that's why I'll repeat it one more time, and so that's why it's so important that we get Brexit done. Thank you very much.
So yeah, thank you very much for coming this morning. It's fantastic to see so many people. This is such a pivotal moment in politics. 10 years ago, while other parties were bailing out the banks, we were building a bridge to the future. As the whole financial system collapsed, our very own Caroline Lucas was one of a small group of people who wrote a roadmap into something so much better, a Green New Deal. We had a chance then to make a radical break from the past and shape a fairer future together. But instead, those that caused the crisis were bailed out by world leaders and let off the hook. And we went back to business as usual. The rich have become richer, while austerity has cruelly punished the poorest. And through all this, we've pushed our planet to dangerous levels of overheating. We ignored the warning signs that things had to change. And now our house is on fire, and we cannot ignore the alarm any longer. We cannot continue with business as usual and push ahead with new roads, coal mines, and airport expansions. And as our children and scientists and David Attenborough are telling us, everything needs to change. And so right now, the Green New Deal is an idea whose time has come. As I said, I'm so proud of the Green Party manifesto, which aims to decarbonise every sector of the British economy by 2030 at the latest, while delivering social justice across Britain. It's the most ambitious Green New Deal anywhere in the world. While the other parties are catching up, we're racing ahead into the distance and reaching new horizons. We are the groundbreakers, the innovators, the originators. We in the Green Party are ready to remain and to transform everything. In Greenwich, there's no need to worry about tactical voting. Every Green vote is a call to action on climate chaos. Every Green vote will make the Green New Deal happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the time out of your day to come this morning. It's been a genuinely huge honour to have represented our constituency in Parliament over the past 4 years. And I hope you know that it's one that I never take for granted. Since I was first elected, since the very first day, I've spent every day fighting to defend and advance the interests of people in Charlton and across the constituency. And amidst the backdrop of a political crisis which has pushed our unwritten constitution and our representative democracy to its limits, I've always sought to do the right thing for our country and for our communities. I'd have liked to have spoken about Brexit more this morning because it is the critical immediate issue that faces the country. When it comes to Brexit, another referendum is the prize that is in our grasp in just a few days' time. In our constituency, the Conservatives consistently come in general elections a clear second. The Liberal Democrats and the Greens at the last general election together got 10% of the vote. This election is simply too important, our politics too volatile, to do anything that puts that another referendum at risk, to lodge a protest, to send a signal, to put one party second over the party that comes third. It's too important for that. The choice locally is between a Conservative candidate who will blindly wade through Boris Johnson's hard Brexit, or me, someone who has worked inside my party to get a referendum with Remain on the ballot paper in our manifesto, who's voted 3 times for a referendum in Parliament already, who is committed to securing a new one, and has pledged once again to lead the campaign for Remain locally if it is secured. That is why the People's Vote campaign itself, the People's Vote that I think many of you want to see happen, recommend, along with Best for Britain, Remain United and other tactical voting sites, a vote for Labour in this constituency on Thursday. I'm asking you to once again put your trust in me so I can continue to champion Charlton and other communities in our constituency, but more importantly, so that we don't put at risk, so we secure the people having the final say on the most important issue that we face in the immediate future, and that is Brexit. That is getting that final say with Remain on the ballot paper and an opportunity to stay in the EU.
I am humbled by the number of people that say they will be voting Liberal Democrat for the first time. Lifelong Labour voters are saying they've had enough of Corbyn sitting on the fence on Brexit and failing to provide an effective opposition to a dangerous government. Lifelong Tory voters are telling me they are ashamed of Johnson, who they believe is morphing into Donald Trump. They bemoan his hard-right agenda and populist pursuit of Brexit at all costs. The Liberal Democrat manifesto was described by the Resolution Foundation as more progressive than Labour's, yet it is unashamedly truthful in its costing, with a dedicated tax to save our NHS. The Institute for Fiscal Studies said that neither the Conservatives or Labour were being honest about the tax hikes needed for their plans. Mr Pennycook just said that you should vote for him because he's a less bad option than the Conservatives.
He didn't.
But you don't need to tactical vote.
He didn't say that.
He said
he never said he was a less bad option.
Sorry, can you let's hear the closing statement, please.
Thanks.
People can remember what was said and what wasn't.
But you don't need to tactical vote here. It's not a marginal. Don't just take my word for it. Vote Smart is a tactical voting aggregator run by Represent Us. This is what they say about Greenwich and Woolwich. The Conservatives are highly unlikely to win here on December the 12th. The seat is a contest between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. We say you can be comfortable voting for your preferred party. If you want to stop Brexit, to combat a climate emergency, to invest a $50 billion Remain bonus in services, to end homelessness, to combat air pollution, to invest in mental health and social care, to protect civil rights and to remain an open, international-facing modern economy, then your preferred party should be Liberal Democrat.
Thank you all very much for coming. Happy voting and Merry Christmas. And if you would just thank all of our candidates who have taken time out of their schedules to actually turn up today as opposed to people that don't really see this, please thank them. Thank you.